With Max Verstappen going into the weekend, the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, with a 10-place grid penalty because he's now using his fifth internal combustion engine, who is going to step up to the plate? Well, there's a bit of an open question. Everybody knew about the 10-place grid penalty going into Friday, but it's McLaren-Mercedes again who have very confidently shown their consistency and their pace. We saw that today on Friday at Spa. It was interesting always to compare what they were going to do around this circuit, which is basically two very fast sectors, the first and last, and then a middle sector, also quick, but a lot more corners in the middle sector. So you can set the car up for more downforce to make it work on that middle sector, or you can take downforce out of the car and be quick in the first and third sectors. That all sounds very simplistic. Of course, it's nothing like as simple as that, particularly with these cars, because bouncing comes into it if you don't get the setup absolutely right in terms of ride height on fast corners. But anyway, we'll get onto that in a minute, how they compared. But it was interesting to see how Red Bull approached this, bearing in mind that it looks as if it's going to be wet on Saturday. So the running we saw today really has a direct bearing on what we might well see on Sunday. And if that's the case, in past years indeed, you could say that on this circuit it's relatively easy to overtake, and a driver like Max in a car like the Red Bull RB20 starting say P11 or P12 still has a pretty good chance of winning, certainly being in the top three, comfortably in the top three. But this year, with McLaren going as well as they are, and potential threats from time to time from Mercedes and Ferrari, there is nothing like the same predictability about the race. And I guess one way of looking ahead to Sunday, bearing in mind that it's highly likely to be wet or showery on Saturday, is to see how the teams prepared for the race in terms of the number of sets of tyres they've got left. This is the state of play at the end of FP2. See that Max has two sets of medium tyres left. But the most interesting thing there, I think, is Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris, both of whom are very well positioned now. Lando running only the soft tyre in FP2, even on the long runs, which is impressive to watch. A bit sporadic, but nonetheless impressive to watch. Lando and Charles Leclerc both have two sets of mediums and two sets of hards. And bearing in mind it could be wet tomorrow, that was a gamble worth taking, because 5 sets of soft tyres, you would imagine, should be enough to get through qualifying tomorrow if there are some dry elements to the afternoon. So very good work, I think, there by Charles Leclerc and also by Lando Norris, and that puts him in a slightly different position from Oscar Piastri in terms of the tyre sets he has available for the race, and that may be a differentiating factor that McLaren might want to bring into play if their two guys are running very closely, as they did, of course, in Hungary. We'll get onto that a little bit further into the video. So let's have a look at the results as they were in the first session today in FP1. These times all recorded on the Pirelli soft. They will all use one set of soft tyres this morning. Max Verstappen 43.3, Oscar Piastri 43.9. You look at that and you think, wow, Red Bull right back where they normally have been in the past around Spa. Really, really good lap. And on that basis, let's have a look at the sector times between those two quickest laps. Sector 1, 30.7 for Max. Oscar Piastri slightly quicker, 30.6. But look what Max does in Sector 2, 44.0 compared with Oscar Piastri, 44.6. So 28.5, 28.3, pretty similar on the third sector. And guess what Red Bull did during the lunch break between FP1 and FP2? They took wing out of the car to pick up pace through sectors 1 and 3. But just going back to those FP1 results, Alex Albon, really good performance to be P3 for Williams-Mercedes. Sadly, that didn't continue through into the afternoon session. The two Mercedes on 44.2, compared that with a 43.9 from Oscar Piastri. Obviously, we had that quick time from Max Verstappen. You can see that Mercedes have been in quite a lot of trouble today. They, more than most, talking about bouncing through the high speed and medium speed corners in Sector 2. So Mercedes, obviously, again, right on that ragged edge, that very, very sharp razor's edge of tyre performance and balance and grip and top speed, all those different variables coming into play. It's nothing like as simple an equation as that McLaren Mercedes are looking at these days. Charles Leclerc, 44.3, pretty good lap from Charles Leclerc. Looked to be slightly quicker and sharper than Carlos Sainz today. Didn't have a brilliant day, Carlos, but Charles Leclerc putting in a lot of laps in the morning and in the afternoon session and looking pretty strong. Okay, so let's have a look at the FP2 results, again on soft tyres. Lando Norris did the quickest lap. He ran out slightly later than the others. So I've got to say Oscar Piastri damaged the floor halfway through, so we shouldn't read too much into the difference there. 42.2 for Lando Norris, very good lap. Oscar Piastri 42.4, Max Verstappen 42.4 as well. Max 30.3 in Sector 1, Lando 30.2, 43.9 Sector 2, 43.8 Lando Norris, 28.3, 28.2. So the McLaren just a little bit quicker everywhere. So that's bad news, of course, for Red Bull. They have said they've been running a lot of different setups, trying different things. But from where Max is likely to be on the grid, as I say, P11 if he's on the pole, P12, P13 possibly, then it's going to be a difficult job for him, certainly to get higher than third and certainly to get near the McLarens, given that sort of pace. So really, really good performance again by McLaren-Mercedes, considering where they've been and where they were and where Ferrari and Mercedes were last year, the factory Mercedes team, how much progress McLaren-Mercedes continue to make. How it's going to work out between the drivers, that remains to be seen, of course. I wonder if they're in the same situation as they were in Hungary, how Lando might react now. Equally, if again Oscar Piastri's in front of Lando and they need one of the two drivers to cover the P3, let's say it's George Russell coming in or Charles Leclerc more likely coming in, they want to cover Charles Leclerc, would again they do bring in Lando Norris and say to him, Lando, if you come out ahead of Oscar, you're going to have to give the position back. Would they do that again? It'd be really interesting to see how they're going to do that. I mean, the best thing McLaren could do is try to get their two drivers, without compromising their pace in any way or their races, on different strategies, different tyres, different length of tyres, age of tyres, whatever it is, try to get some differentiation there. But if they're both equal in everything they're doing, stand back and watch. I suppose a lot of people are saying, wow, this is great, isn't it? Who cares about the rest of it? We got the two McLarens going on. But I don't know, it's just kind of a weird thing watching the two of them now and the dynamic there between Oscar and Lando. Superficially, it's fine, but for sure below the surface there's a lot more than we can see. And before we get on to the fuel runs, let's just have a look at the top speeds. Slightly confusing at Spa because the speed trap, incredibly, is just on the exit of Eau Rouge. It's not where they reach terminal velocity at the top of the hill there. And this trap here is called Intermediate 1, which I'm assuming is at the top of the hill there. Anyway, they're very quick speeds, as you can see. 351, Pierre Gasly quickest. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at that, all the quick guys are relatively slow through the trap, and all the slow guys are relatively quick through the trap. What does that mean? That means downforce costs you top speed, causes drag. And the teams at the bottom, of course, apart from Esteban Ocon, the teams there at the bottom you see, McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, are all the teams that are generating more downforce, creating more drag, and can play around a little bit with wing settings. Whereas the Williamses, the Saubers, the Hasses are very quick through the air. Not a lot they can do about that. They would all like to be a little bit slower, I suspect. Having said that, if you're Max Verstappen, you want to be as quick as possible in a straight line, so he won't be very happy when he looks at those top speeds there. But if you start from, say, Carlos Sainz is probably the first realistic runner, 340, George Russell doing 340, so Ferrari and Mercedes pretty much on a par, Charles Leclerc also 340, Lewis Hamilton 336, which is either set up or it's engine setting, saving something. I mean, he won't be happy about that at all. Slower even than Max Verstappen in 338. But look at Lando Norris, 338 as well. So absolutely quickest around the lap, but only 338 compared with Pierre Gasly, 351 through the air, through the trap there. So very impressive. All running the DRS open, of course. You've got to factor in potential for toes there. Probably that's the case with Pierre Gasly. So maybe Alex Albon at 342 is the realistic fastest of all. Let's have a look at some fuel runs. We did have some fuel runs in the morning. You can see there Max staying away from the medium tyre, everybody else running the medium. He starts on the soft, does quite a good long run on the soft, 49.4, 49.4 again, 49.5, and then switches to the hards. Goes pretty well on the hards, 48.5. Compare that with the others. The Red Bull there looks pretty good, but that's before they've had to take wing out of the car, before they're compromising their sector 2, and equally it's before McLaren have trimmed their cars as well. More significant going into the race on Sunday, bearing in mind it's likely to be wet on Saturday, are the fuel runs in FP2. And look at that, Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri had virtually the same running plan throughout the afternoon. Amazing that both stopped virtually, it wasn't at the same time because they started slightly differently. They had virtually the same number of laps on the medium and then went to the soft. So really significant comparison there between Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. Let's look at it. 48.3, 48.7, 48.8, 48.8, 48.7, 49.3, 48.9. So looking quite good for Max until he gets to the 48.9. Then all of a sudden Oscar's going quite well. Then Max's tyres, which were a little bit older, go into the 50s, 51, and Oscar's staying in the 49s. So that's quite a significant... Well, I think what we can say from that is that McLaren is at least as good as the Red Bull with fuel in the car. As I say, Max's tyres are a little bit older. So now they both put on some scrub softs that they'd run earlier in the session to do their quick times. 49.6, 47.4 for Oscar, 47.8 for Max, gets his act together, 47.7, 47.5, 47.5 Oscar Piastri. So on that soft tyre run right at the end, Oscar looking very confident and very quick. Max doing one lap. Can't say he wasn't confident, probably got traffic. Lando on the soft tyre was a bit all over the place in terms of lap time. Didn't seem to be a significant run. I mean, that was all about not running a set of mediums, I think, and saving that new set for the race. Charles Leclerc, good long soft tyre run, 49.5, he's doing 49.7, 49.8. And with Charles doing that long run on the soft tyre, let's just see what Max was doing on the soft tyre in the morning. 49.4, 49.5, 49.4. Charles Leclerc's in 49.7, 49.8. Yeah, so he's a bit off, bearing in mind the track's a little bit quicker as well, so he's a little bit off. But a good consistent run from Charles Leclerc. And George Russell on the medium tyre, 50.3, 50.2, does a couple of laps, 3 laps in the 49s, but looks to be a bit of a struggle for George. He was first out on track this morning in FP1, looked pretty sharp. You thought, wow, it's George Russell going for it, quick already. But he was never that quick, and the car's obviously quite difficult. As I say, it's very knife-edgy with the Mercedes at the moment. So there we are, that was Friday. Max with that grid penalty, McLaren looking as if they're going to have a walkover this weekend, bearing in mind where Max is going to be starting. And problem for him really is going to be getting through that first corner. Very unusual for a first lap at Spa to take place without some sort of incident at La Source. And guess what? If he does a great job and he starts P11, Max is going to be right in the middle of that potential first corner accident. So for the big job for him this weekend, more than anything else, is to get out of that first corner without the car being damaged in any way. I'm sure that's in his mind. I'm sure a lot of people around him are telling him that and saying that. It's one thing to understand that. Of course, it's quite another to execute. There's a lot of people around there going to be pushing and shoving. Whether you're on the inside, the outside, very difficult to predict what's going to happen at that hairpin. But that's all part of Formula One, and I don't think Max will be the last of the top runners to have to take a 10-place grid penalty because of an internal combustion engine change. They're doing it, Red Bull that is, they're doing it at Spa, the circuit where you've got the least possible downside really from starting from the middle of the field because it's relatively easy to overtake. But at the moment looks to be heading in the direction again of another McLaren-Mercedes victory. Let's see what happens on Sunday. See you tomorrow.